Welcome back to our YouTube channel. In today's video, we will find out the top 10 punishments in history you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. The human mind has long been able to devise terrifying new ways to punish would-be wrongdoers, villains, witches, and anyone else who has been unfortunate enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. We are all familiar with the old methods: hanging, burning, stoning, yawn. What if someone hurts you? Does he steal your sheep, or must he somehow have caused a bad harvest or something because they peeked at you that time? Over the centuries, some extremely brutal methods of torture and execution have come and gone, and some have not yet left. Here are the 10 terrifying types of torture, but don't try it at home. Number 10. Scaphism. Scaphism was one of the worst and most painful methods of torture. It was described by the Greeks as a punishment used by the Persians, and if they are to be believed, those Persians were crazy. In this execution, the defendant was trapped between two boats or in a hollowed-out tree trunk and was force-fed milk and honey. Okay, that part doesn't sound bad. But the diet of milk and honey eventually caused horrible diarrhea, which remained inside the wooden enclosure. The unfortunate condemned man was smeared with more milk and honey and left in the sun or near calm waters, where insects would be attracted to dirt, rot, and sweetness. The person would inevitably die from dehydration, exposure, or bite and stinging injuries. Number 9. White torture. While the term white torture can mean any psychological torture in general, the meaning here is more literal. White torture is a type of sensory deprivation in which the prisoner's cell, clothes, and even food are completely white. The guards wear white, the lights are on 24 hours a day, and no words are spoken. No color is visible. It was documented in the case of Amir Fakhrivar, who was arrested in his native Iran and subjected to white torture for about 8 months in 2004. While the physical pain of sensory deprivation is minimal compared to other tortures on this list, the psychological damage is incomparable. Fakhrivar was quoted as saying that when he was released, he was no longer a normal person and could no longer even remember the faces of his parents. Number 8. Drawing and quartering. Drawing and slaughtering are some of the most infamous methods of cruel and unusual punishment. It's still hard to believe it's something real conceived by real humans and happened to real unfortunate souls. The punishment was first imposed in England in the 13th century. They dragged the accused, tied him to a horse, and dragged him to the gallows, and then usually hanged him, perhaps gutted or beheaded. Later, the condemned man was dismembered. That is, his body was divided into quarters, sometimes tying each limb to a different horse and making him run in opposite directions. This punishment was reserved for those guilty of treason. Number 7. Execution vans. China has made capital punishment surprisingly efficient. Not surprising considering that China carries out the most executions per year of any country in the world. A variety of crimes are punishable by death, including tax fraud, arson, and production. Many executions in China are now carried out in mobile execution units, vans equipped with restraints and drugs required for lethal injection. The vans, which look like typical police vans, have been around for about a decade. There are dozens of them across the country, providing lethal justice closer to crime scenes. Not only are they cheaper than more traditional structures, Chinese officials say, but they are more humane than their other preferred method of execution: death by gunshot. Number 6. Upright jerker. The upright jerker was an interesting twist on a classic playing method. Hanging up, while being a true standby resource around the world, leaves a lot to be desired in terms of effectiveness. Depending on the person's weight, rope, hatch, and many other factors, it can be a very slow or uncomfortable way to die. The natural solution: do it in reverse. The vertical jerker was a modified suspension system that used heavy weights and pulleys to quickly launch the condemned into the air. It was expected to be a more effective way to break your neck quickly, but it didn't always work as intended. The team was abolished in 1867. Number 5. Blood eagle. The blood eagle comes from Norse legends of Viking executions. The doomed back was severed to give access to the ribs, which were then snapped and twisted upward to look like wings. To add damage to the wound, salt was poured into the wound, and as a final blow, the lungs were pulled out and the wings of the ribs covered for effect. Fortunately, there is a debate as to whether this practice actually existed or not, or whether it is just a legend. Either way, it's terrifying that someone took the time to think about it. Number 4. Keel hauling. Keel hauling was a type of punishment specific to sailors, devised by the Dutch Navy in the late 16th century. The criminals were tied with a rope and dragged underwater from one end of the ship to the other. Although many died from the practice due to drowning or internal injuries, theoretically, it was not always thought to be fatal. As a bonus, men who were punished with trawling were often mercilessly cut from barnacles on the bottom of the ship keel and carried the scars with them throughout their lives. If they lived, of course. Number 3. Rat torture. Rat torture reminds of creatives, having recently appeared in the movie Too Fast, Too Furious and the television series Game of Thrones. In this terrifying, and I admit, creative form of torture, a hungry and auric rat is placed in a bucket on the victim's bare chest or stomach. The cube is then heated from the outside, and the agitated rat chews the unfortunate person's flesh and whatever organ it finds as it exists. Number 2. Poona Chol. Poona Chol under Roman law was a type of death penalty imposed on a subject who had been found guilty of patricide. The punishment consisted of being sewn up in a leather sack with an assortment of live animals including a dog, snake, monkey, and a chicken or rooster, and then being thrown into the water. The punishment may have varied widely in its frequency and precise form during the Roman period. For example, the earliest fully documented case is from circa 100 BC, although scholars think the punishment may have developed about a century earlier. The inclusion animals in the sack series are only documented from early imperial times, and at the beginning only snakes were mentioned. At the time of Emperor Hadrian, 2nd century AD, the most well-known form of punishment was documented, where a cock, a dog, a monkey, and a viper were inserted in the sack. At the time of Hadrian, Poona Chol was made into an optional form of punishment for parricides. The alternative was being thrown to the beasts in the arena. During the 3rd century AD up to the accession of Emperor Constantine, Poona Chol fell out of use. Constantine revived it, now with only serpents to be added in the sack. Well, over 200 years later, Emperor Justinian reinstituted the punishment with the 4 animals, and Poona Chol remained the statutory penalty for parricides within Byzantine law for the next 400 years, when it was replaced with being burned alive. Poona Chol gained a revival of sorts in late medieval and early modern Germany, with late cases of being drowned in a sack along with living animals being documented from Saxony in the first half of the 18th century. The punishment of the sack, or Poona Chol, was another oddly specific form of execution. It was used in ancient Rome in cases of parricide, or killing one's parents or another close family member. The condemned was sewn into a leather sack with several animals, including a dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster. Then the whole bag was tossed into a body of water. If the animals didn't kill the alleged murderer, drowning surely would. Number 1. Punished by rack. Rack punishment was a very popular torture device that consisted of a 4-sided wooden frame. The convict would be tied on all 4 sides with cables, and using band-aids, the person's arms and legs would be stretched until they were torn from the body or rendered ineffective. The shelf is a torture device consisting of a rectangular frame, usually made of wood, slightly raised from the ground, with a roller at one or both ends. The victim's ankles are attached to one roller and the wrists chained to the other. As the interrogation progresses, a handle and ratchet mechanism attached to the top roller are used to very gradually retract the chains, slowly increasing the stress on the prisoner's shoulders, hips, knees to elbows, and causing excruciating pain. Using pulleys and levers, this roller could rotate on its axis, thus stretching the ropes until the joints of the affected person dislocated and finally separated. Also, if the muscle fibers are overly stretched, they lose their ability to contract, rendering them ineffective. Tell us in the comment section your thoughts. That's it from today's video. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay happy. See you in the next video.